Good morning, everyone. Thank you to everyone who is joining us this morning. My name is Dewana Goldstone, and I am an Associate Professor of History and Director of the African American Studies program at Texas State University. Long before I was at Texas State, I was a PhD student in American Studies at the University of Texas, and my dissertation, which became my book, Integrating the 40 Acres, the 50-Year Struggle for Racial Equality at the University of Texas, documents how UT both passively and actively fought desegregation efforts really beginning in the 1920s, and some might argue going into today. I'm going to be the moderator, and I'm going to introduce you to your panel. Matt Hames, who is the director of When I Rise. Dr. Don Carlton, producer of When I Rise and executive director of the Briscoe Center for American History. Icy Simpson Monroe, an opera singer and musician featured in When I Rise. And Eva Goins Simmons, a member of the Precursors, a group of the first Black students to attend the University of Texas in the 1950s. Unfortunately, Dr. Joseph, the Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, cannot attend today because of a previous engagement. I'm going to ask Matt my first question. You begin and end the film in Center Point, where Barbara was born. Why was Center Point so important to you to include?
Well, thank you to the Paramount and thank you to Austin PBS for having us. And it's an honor to be on this panel. In terms of Center Point, and your question about that, everyone's hometown instills something in them. And I kind of wanted to foreground that as a theme. And what I mean by that is the very first time I met Barbara wasn't in New York at the opera. It was actually in the Piney Woods in East Texas on a really, really hot day. So I saw her first in that context at Center Point. And there was this homecoming that they do annually, and she was there for that. And the meeting of Barbara on that day possibly was intentional on the part of Don Carlton, the executive producer, he'll have to say. But I expected to meet an opera star, and I meet this woman that has her shoes off, and she's running around hugging everyone and smiling, and she gave me a big hug, and then I went over to the church with her. And music, certainly played a tremendous part in that community. I could tell that right away, but the church was the center of the place, and faith was the key. So later on, I filmed her in New York and Austin, but the Center Point Church is where I really felt like she was truly relaxed. And then I filmed her several times over the course of a couple of years. And she always wanted to make sure that Center Point, that we were foregrounding Center Point, and then that, we were communicating that helped her deal with whatever the world threw at her. And that theme kept coming up. When she came to UT and made friends, I interviewed her friends Bud Mims and Carolyn Graves, and a lot of the people that she became friends with had been members of student religious organizations. They were Presbyterian, Southern Baptists, and Methodists. And so there was also a student organization on campus, the Student Christian Organization. So it made sense to begin and end the story in Center Point because Center Point represents faith, and it can be a sustaining force. And it seems like faith can also continue to work for people who are fighting for inclusivity.
Thank you. Dr. Carlton, why did the Briscoe Center decide to produce this documentary?
Let me unmute myself. Well, I first met Barbara Conrad in I guess it was the late 1980s when she was paying a visit to campus. And when she was back on campus in the late 1990s, Admiral Bob Inman arranged for us to have lunch together and get to know each other a little better, because Barbara was very much an expert in the history of American spirituals and gospel music, and she was interested in the center's efforts to really for our efforts to expand our archives and holdings to document the history of American music. And so at that lunch, thankfully, we hit it off, thankfully for me, at least. And at the lunch, she accepted my offer to serve as my advisor in those particular fields that were of great interest to her. And she also agreed to serve as an ambassador for the center's programs, which she fulfilled greatly. Bob Inman, who was a fellow distinguished alumnus of the university, along with Barbara. In fact, they were inducted in the same distinguished alumnus class together, and that's how they knew each other. Bob subsequently, he established an endowment at the center in Barbara's honor, the Barbara Conrad Fund, that helps support the center's efforts to document American music, and will continue to do that for long into the future. And some of the financial support for When I Rise came from that fund. Actually, that's what provided the seed money for us to move forward. So after Barbara and I had worked together for a few years, she had established her own collection at the center, and we became close friends. And I got to know a great deal about her life experiences, particularly her experience at the university and her subsequent professional career, which was, you could tell, was very successful. By that time, the center had an oral historian on staff, Aaron Purdy, and we decided that we should do an in-depth video interview with Barbara to preserve her memories about her career. While Aaron was conducting those interviews, it became obvious that Barbara's story was so compelling and historically important that it would make a great documentary. I thought it was important to have a film that not only preserved Barbara's story, but would also serve as an educational tool for university faculty to use to teach our students about the university's history of racial discrimination and the struggle and hardships endured by the first Black students at the university, using Barbara's experience as a way to demonstrate that. And happily, Barbara agreed to cooperate, although it did take a little bit of persuasion. I had just been involved in a documentary about the experiences of a Texas airman in World War II titled Last Best Hope, which was directed and produced by Matt Hames. And the film was co-produced by Ramona Kelly, who was the Briscoe Center's chief development officer at that time. So I felt that Ramona gave us the expertise and experience based on her work on that film with Matt to guide the Barbara Conrad documentary project for the center. Ramona had worked well with Matt Hames and his colleagues at Alpheus, and we were impressed, frankly, with their vision and talent. So Ramona and I agreed that Alpheus would be an excellent choice to serve as our production team for the film about Barbara. And fortunately for us, Matt agreed to take on this project. I assumed the position of executive producer, which meant I had to figure out how to pay for the film. That was a fun part. And I assigned Ramona and Briscoe Center's director for special projects, Allison Beck, to work directly with Matt as co-producers of the film. The project took a couple of years to complete. And as you could see, they did an outstanding job, and we're very happy with the results.
Thank you. This question is for Icy. Do you think it's still difficult for African Americans to excel at opera?
If I'm honest, I think it's difficult for African Americans in any field where they're not expected to perform. And I think opera is included in that. So we're not a normal face that you would see on stage. And therefore, it's different for people to come to that acceptance if they're not seeing the tangible all the time. And I think there's two aspects here. One, I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit because I think we have some younger listeners. And so I kind of want to give an example that may meet them where they are. So say you're in middle school, you're in high school, you're in your musical theater program, and you guys are doing a few shows a year. And this is a certain time period there's a certain era in the show, certain characters. Your teachers are trying to figure out, well, how do we find the right student that fits this character, that sounds like this, that looks like this. And you just don't see a lot of us. And I think what makes it harder is, say, for example, you see a lot of African Americans in one space. Unfortunately, a lot of houses, and when I say houses, I mean opera houses, they're going to look at us and think Porgy and Bess. They're going to look at us and think Tremonisha, which is a Scott Joplin opera. And however, I sing Mozart very well, you know? And so it's one of those things where respecting the composer is important. But it's also important that we cultivate diversity because we're good as well. We sing just as well. We do math just as well. We do all these things just as well. It's okay. Let's normalize diversity. And when I say that, I think the other issue is, and it's hard to kind of discuss it, but sometimes diversity in houses or corporations, it looks like we have to have diversity. So let's choose an African American, a Hispanic, this, and let's get our diversity. But is there really diversity in your company or in your house because we deserve to be there? And so if we can begin to come to this space, and fortunately, I'll say this, fortunately, due to recent movements, there's been a level of accountability. There have been statements that have been made. You know what, we recognize that our inclusivity might not be as genuine, or we might not have been going about it correctly. However, I think when we get to the point where we're normalizing inclusivity and diversity, then I think it'll be like, okay, this makes sense. So yeah, I hope I answered that.
Thank you. Mrs. Simmons, this question is for you. So you grew up in Austin, is that right?
I did.
You did. So what made you decide to go to the University of Texas, do you want to tell us what year you went to UT?
1956.
Okay, so you were in the year right after they integrated, because they integrated in 55.
Correct.
What made you decide to go to University of Texas?
It really wasn't my choice. I wanted to go to an HBCU, and my mother vetoed that. She thought I was too young to be away somewhere by myself, finding my own way. I don't know why she thought that, because she reared me to be an independent person with a strong spirit. But UT was okay. I could have chosen Houston-Tillotson, but that didn't occur to me at that time. My mother worked for the Scarborough family. I don't even know if the store is still there or not. But on some occasions, I would have to take the bus to the Scarborough home so my mom and I could take the bus downtown and conduct whatever business she needed to conduct on my behalf. So I was not unfamiliar with the campus. It wasn't overwhelming. I felt welcome on the campus because they had a camp. I don't remember where, but it was on some lake for incoming freshman students. And I thought that was a nice thing to do. And that was a nice experience, actually, until I saw my camp counselor on campus in passing one day. And I was so glad to see somebody that I knew. And I yelled out to him, "Hi, Bob," or whatever his name was. And, you know, he gave me this look like, who is that yelling at me? And that was a downer, but I got over it. And I had a good experience at UT. I was the Almetris Marsh Duran co-op representative to the Inter-Co-op Council. So that gave me a connection. I have a white friend, quite frankly, that I'm still in touch with her, and that too is very nice. My association with the precursors keeps me up to date on what's happening. So I still feel connected and I support in different ways.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Matt for this question. Were there any great scenes left on the cutting room floor you wish you could have included?
There were a lot of great scenes. I mean, a lot of great interviews, I thought, but it just, you had to kind of tell a story and keep it in a certain time limit. But I really enjoyed all the interviews that I did. I interviewed some people, some older people that grew up in Center Point and went to school there, and very, very, elderly people that would have already been kind of old when Barbara was there. And I wish we could have included those, but it just didn't really fit. And then we did, quite a few interviews. We sat down with you, actually, Dr. Goldstone, and that was a great interview, and we didn't use all of it, but your thesis, I guess, your dissertation was kind of like the foundation for the beginning of the research that I did. That was like the first thing I really read, the first in-depth thing that had been written. I don't know if that was the first thing that was really ever a deep dive into the whole Conrad situation, but at any rate, yeah, interviewing you was great. And there were a lot more things like that.
Well, thank you. I'm going to tell you this funny story. So people are always surprised at how old I am. And so when it premiered at the Paramount, I was in the audience with some people. And when I came up on the screen, these people said, "Oh my gosh, it's you." Like they had no idea. So I really appreciated working with you. I was so glad that that story about Barbara was told. She was an amazing human being. Don, this question is for you. What is in the Barbara Conrad collection at the Briscoe Center?
Really, it's her papers, it's her memorabilia, photographs, a really nice photograph collection, just posters, the things that document and illuminate this fantastic career largely in the field of opera. She had an unbelievable, well, as everyone could see in the film, she had this unbelievable professional experience. So the collection, Barbara's own collection and papers, largely, the vast majority of them deal directly with her experiences as a professional in the opera world. And there's a little bit, we do have some materials that are from her student days, largely some of the publicity that was generated by the entire affair when she was removed from the student opera. But it's a really wonderful resource. And we have, by the way, Barbara's portrait in one of her roles with the New York Metropolitan Opera. We have her portrait featured in our reading room now at the Briscoe Center. So she's a real hero to all of us. And the association with the center was incredible and one of the best experiences I ever had.
Yeah, I love the love letters she got after when it became controversial in the 50s. That all these.
Yeah, that's the other aspect that turned out to be valuable was the fact that the Briscoe Center has the official records of the university, including the president's office. And so she was able to read letters that had been sent to the university's administration and not to her. Some of them had been sent to her and they never got to her. But at any rate, I think that's one of the more riveting sections of the film, actually, is when she's really, truly the first time to be reading these letters after all those years. And that's probably one of the most commented scenes in the film that we have received over the years. But anyway, that's also an important collection as well.
Thank you. I see this one is for you. You talked a little bit about difficulties for African Americans in opera. Can you tell us about your career since the film was made?
Well, again, to appeal to some of the younger students here, versatility is key. I think, as an African American making my way in the field of opera, this being my trade, this being what I love, I recognize that I needed to be able to take up multiple styles of singing with authenticity, like be able to do it really well. And so I'm grateful that since then I had worked with James Levine, who was the music director for a time at the Metropolitan Opera. Sang with him for a little bit, and he kind of coached me a little bit and stuff like that. And so I booked my first Beethoven's Ninth, pre-COVID, of course, as the soprano soloist. And so that was really big as well. Also singing multiple conferences, and then also doing some contemporary Christian work in some church communities, and yeah, different things like that. Now, again, going to the versatility point, once COVID hit, it hit all of us musicians pretty hard. And so I know I specifically probably lost 98% of my work. And so I had to pivot at that point. And I have a small business called the Voice Clinic, where I do rehabilitative voice lessons or functional voice lessons. And I sell products through that, loose leaf teas for the voice and the body, and then also general products for times of anxiety, candles and bath salts and stuff like that. And now things are slowly beginning to pick up. So I have a couple of master classes booked, and I'll be going to Arizona soon to work with a young dance company, and we'll be doing a joint recitals there. And so, yeah, things are happening.
And you're doing all that with 2 kids.
With 2 kids in tow.
It's amazing. Mrs. Simmons, this question is for you. So, and we talked about this on the phone. I don't want to be telling everyone your business, but so you came to college, you stayed for 2 years or 3 years, and then left and came back, right? You're on mute. Yeah.
I attended UT that first eventful year. Then my parents moved to Las Vegas, and of course, I was obligated to move as well. I got a job, saved my money for 2 years, every cent of it, and then announced that I was returning to college to UT. My mother tried to discourage me from doing that. She still wasn't ready to let go. I'm the younger of the 2. But I went anyway. I rode the Greyhound bus for 23 hours, crying all the way because I had defied my mother. Within 2 weeks, I had a job at the Austin Recreation Department, and I was on my way.
And did you notice the segregation at UT, or you just, that was the world you had grown up in and you were there to get an education? And
well, I don't recall being so aware of the segregation part, except for particular events that occurred. For example, no Black athletes in the athletic department. So I just didn't participate in those things. I was working anyway. I do recall participating in the sit-ins and the stand-ins to desegregate Paramount Theater, as it were, and the drag, all of that. And my awareness of this segregation thing grew as I became more knowledgeable and had other experiences and thought them through and connected them to my race or my femaleness.
And so there was one other question I wanted to ask you about that. Did you feel connected to UT when you graduated, or you just graduated, moved to Vegas, started your life? And
I did feel connected, but it was in a narrow space, I would say. As you know, the Black females were all segregated in Almitra's Durham Co-op, if we lived there. I only learned a few years ago that the first year of desegregation, the Black female students lived on the Houston Tillotson campus. And I only lived a few blocks away from there, but I never knew that until recently. I Our young men, of course, were segregated in dorm D. So when they came to hang out or whatever, and you know, Miss Marsh was mother to us all, they would come to the co-op and we would play games. Some of them would, I don't know what kind of an arrangement was made, but they would have their meals at the co-op. And so we became like a family unto ourselves, no different than our family at home or our church family or our community family. We became support, encouragement, whatever we needed in and of ourselves. So we were like a self-contained unit. We were going to get through this. I said once that I was glad to get in, because my teachers were proud that I was able to do that. My family was proud that I was able to do that. And then I was glad to get out so I could get on with my life.
You majored in PE, right? And became a PE teacher and
Nope, I did major in health and PE. Never taught it a day.
oh, you never did. That was me who wanted to do that.
I wanted to be a physical therapist,
Okay.
but as I thought that through, I've got to get this degree, then I've got to get into med school somewhere. I've got to have money to do that. Then I've got to pass some state board exam. And then somebody has to hire me, little old black me. That was just too many hurdles for me to deal with at that time. So I got the degree in health and PE. And then the pressure was on for me to rejoin with the family here in Vegas, which I had no intention of doing. But my mother was a powerful influence. So here I am. And before leaving Austin to return here, I became aware that I could take a civil service exam because I was a sociology minor. And if I passed that exam, I could become a social worker. Well, I did that. And in the meantime, I also applied with the school district because what I really wanted to do was teach school. But never heard from Nevada State Welfare, never heard. My sister lived up the street from Judge Mullen, the juvenile court judge. And so she had a conversation with him one day about my application to state welfare and that I had never heard anything. Judge Mullen happened to be well acquainted with Michael Callahan, who was the director for Nevada State Welfare. So he passed the story on to him. Well, Mike went into the office, went through the file, and lo and behold, there are these folders with these little red check marks on them. And guess who that was? Eva Simmons, Mary Wells, and one other.
So all African-American.
All African-American females. So he plucked them out. He contacted us. We were hired. Not only were we hired, Mike picked us up at the airport in Reno, Nevada, which is a far more conservative community than is Las Vegas. He drove us to Carson City for our training. He found a motel in downtown Reno that would allow us to reside there for a week while we took our training, because that didn't happen either. You know, the desegregation of Las Vegas was like reliving all of that other again. So he would pick us up, take us, bring us back home, take us someplace to get our evening meal, and then deposit us at this motel. I worked for Nevada State Welfare for 1 year with the old age recipients. And emotionally, it was just too much for me to comprehend that adult children could just let their old people fall by the wayside. You know, Black people don't do that. If we have a crumb to share, we share it with somebody in the family who needs it probably more than we do. So the contract for the school district came in the mail, and I had another revelation. I was assigned to an elementary school on the far east end, and we were required to submit a photograph within 30 days. I submitted the photograph, and suddenly I'm reassigned from this school, which was too far for me to deal with anyway, to the school in the segregated community. So I figured that out. And less than 10 years later, I think it was 1972, I found myself involved in the lawsuit to desegregate the Clark County School District.
In Clark County,
And-
is where Vegas is, right?
Yes, yes, we have countywide districts. And
Okay,
so
I
the rest
I
is,
should probably cut you off, so, because you and I will keep talking and people will.
yes, and that's fine.
Okay,
But anyway, I hope I answered your question.
yeah, thank you.
I love it.
Yeah, I do too, but I like, Eve and I will be, it'll be an hour later and we'll still be chatting, so. So I'm going to start to wrap this up a little bit, but I say I wanted to ask you this question that was originally for Dr. Joseph, but I think you could answer it well too. What role can today's audience, comprised of middle and high school students from Texas, play in ongoing civil rights movements such as Black Lives Matter?
Sure. Whenever I'm speaking to, and I do get called on occasion to speak to majority white schools, I always talk to them about awareness versus immersion. Those are the two words that I like to bring up to them. But before, I'm gonna try to keep it as short as I can. I was taking some notes here. One thing to understand is whenever you're learning something new, there's always a level of chaos. There's always a level of disruption. It's just like a child that's trying to learn how to walk. They're gonna fall. It's gonna feel uncomfortable. And that's okay. And I think that's the first step, is knowing that there are going to be uncomfortable moments, that if we're brave enough to kind of address them outright and to say, hey, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't sound right. Why am I feeling this way about this person? Have I gotten to know this person? Ask yourself those questions, be honest about it, and let's have a dialogue about it. So that's the first thing. Awareness to me is when you're in your household and you're taught, for example, racism is wrong, and that's it. And you go to your school that's comprised of the same race, and you go back home to your neighborhood that's comprised of the same race, and you know that racism is wrong, but nothing else has been put in, has processed in your mind as to how wrong it is, or what's in your mind, or what systemic things are being taught to you, versus immersion, going to that person, not being afraid to communicate, getting rid of assumptions. A Black person may respond to you like this. They may get the next turn like this. It doesn't mean they don't like you. It just means that this is where we come from. We got a little more attitude in our pockets. That's okay. And I think understanding at the end of the day that differences are to be celebrated. I want you to see me. I want you to see my color. I want you to see my nails. I want you to see my hair, and I want you to respect it. I don't want you to not see my color and to see me as nothing, because I'm different from you, and that's why I respect you. And lastly, I would say stand on principle. it's going to be hard. You might have different thoughts in your household. You might have different thoughts in your friend circles. But if you know what's right in your heart, stand on that, because we're going to need that in the years to come. People to be brave enough to say, you know what? Diversity is a good thing, and I respect you for who you are. So I hope that helps.
It does. And I appreciate you talking about noticing color. I think we live in this society that says, someone called me yesterday and started quoting Dr. King, and I'm not supposed to see your color. And I think this idea that we live in a colorblind world, or that that's an aspiration, is, it doesn't take into account that I don't live in the world that this white man wants to live in, and that my experience is colored by my skin color, by my gender, by my experiences. And
Yes.
to somehow say, oh, I don't, Dr. King says I'm not supposed to look at your color, the aspiration, I think, it's kind of crazy. But anyway, thank you for that answer. Does anyone else want to answer it? Matt, Don?
I have nothing to add. That was perfectly put.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree, totally.
So I'm going to close today's session, and I want to thank the panelists for joining us and for sharing their knowledge with all of us. And we're going to close with Icy Simpson Monroe singing the Lord's Prayer.
All right, let me get a note here real quick. I have my portable keyboard. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the
That was amazing. Thank you.
Bravo.